In this episode, I'm going to share encounters with skinwalkers coming from the southwest United States, with the majority of them taking place in Arizona. These stories include a man who had a terrifying experience near the border while driving back from Mexico, a man who had a bizarre encounter on a Navajo reservation, two stories from two separate posters who live in Arizona and saw strange things outside their bedroom windows when they were young, and a man who had several encounters while on a road trip through Arizona that were followed by dreams when he returned home. But first, we start with a young man who witnessed someone or something running alongside his bus one night while traveling home from a basketball away game in high school. Also, if you'd like to help support the channel, click on the join button below. Alright, let's get into today's stories. The first story of this episode comes to us from a poster who saw something terrifying while riding a bus back from a sporting event in high school. He lives in Arizona and the bus was traveling through a Navajo reservation at the time. What he saw that night scared him to the point that he got physically ill and now completely avoids driving through the reservation. The original poster, or OP, begins by saying that if you've ever set foot on a Navajo reservation, chances are you've either heard some spine-chilling tales or experienced them firsthand. The main cause of these encounters is none other than Skinwalkers. He has encountered one of these beings and turned to the online community to share his story. He was born and raised in a small town located in northern Arizona. It is nestled between two reservations, one to the north and the largest Navajo reservation in the United States to the south. His high school was very small, with an average enrollment of just 80 students each year. As a result, whenever they had a sporting event, they had to embark on long journeys south, which spanned anywhere from 5 to 10 hours just to play another school the same size. This meant countless trips through the Navajo reservation. Normally, during such a trip, they would stay in hotels during their away games, spending the night before returning home the next morning. However, this particular trip was different. His basketball coach informed the team that the school couldn't afford to put them up in a hotel on that occasion. Therefore, they would have to endure a grueling 12-hour road trip. They played their game and were on their way back home. They would reach the Navajo reservation about 2 hours into their return trip. When they reached the reservation, which was about 2 a.m., everyone on the bus was asleep, except for the OP. By this point, the bus driver had suddenly accelerated, reaching a speed of about 85 miles an hour. This was unusual, being that he had always followed the speed limit during the OP's entire high school career. While his teammates slept, he found himself unable to do the same. Instead, he sat at the back of the bus gazing out at the vast desert landscape illuminated by the full moon. As he looked out, he noticed a figure sprinting towards the bus, effortlessly keeping up with its high speed. It was a humanoid figure resembling a human, but with a face half painted black and half painted white. Its eyes were glowing brightly. The glow reminded him of a rabbit's eyes reflecting light. His initial reaction was, "Holy crap, it's a skinwalker." The running figure swiftly approached the edge of the road, effortlessly keeping pace with the bus as it hurdled brush and rocks. Its gaze was fixed on the OP, and once their eyes met, he found himself unable to look away. It felt as though an invisible force was holding his head and eyes in place. The skinwalker smiled then, and it was anything but human, stretching from ear to ear, revealing its crooked yellow pointed teeth. Nausea overwhelmed him and panic consumed him throughout the entire incident. Suddenly, the skinwalker dropped down onto all fours, still managing to keep pace with the bus. The OP watched in disbelief as its bones cracked and reformed and hair sprouted all over its body. In a matter of seconds, it transformed into a coyote and disappeared into the desert, vanishing from sight. As soon as the now coyote disappeared, the OP rushed to the onboard bathroom and vomited a mixture of food and blood. He didn't share his experience with anyone for fear that they would dismiss him as insane. However, he decided to confide in his Navajo friend, who advised him to seek the guidance of the chief, who was also a close friend of his. The following day at school, he saw the chief in the parking lot. He approached the OP, muttering something in Navajo while waving a feathered, scepter-like object in front of him. Without another word, he turned and climbed into his truck before driving away. To this day, the OP has not encountered another Skinwalker. He believes it could be because he moved away from his hometown and the reservation. If he does have to travel to the southern part of Arizona, he takes a wide detour around the reservation, a route that avoids any possibility of encountering one again. Based on the stories I've heard and narrated on this channel, Navajo reservations can be extremely creepy at night, and events like in this story are the main reason why. I'm sure it isn't like that every night with Skinwalkers running rampant, but many Navajo grow up hearing stories about them, and many have the misfortune of seeing these beings firsthand. I would imagine this, or just knowing the Skinwalkers could possibly be out there, would make them a little leery going outside after dark and give the night an eerie feel. But just like in so many cryptid stories, there is a certain feeling hanging in the air when one is nearby. I'm thinking that maybe the bus driver either got this eerie feeling while approaching the reservation, or saw this thing too, and that's why he sped up as fast as he did. Maybe he had heard some of the same stories and wanted to get through the reservation as fast as possible, being that it was late. I usually discount stories when people claim to see Skinwalkers, or anything else for that matter, transform before their very eyes. I just feel like they wouldn't want people to see them do that. But on the other hand, who would believe them? I decided to keep this story in this episode and let you make up your minds for yourselves. Now, being that I consider every possibility in these stories, including rational explanations, it could be that he had just fallen asleep and dreamt the whole thing. He could have just woken up to run to the bathroom when he felt sick. However, if this is the case, I will say I've covered a lot of stories on this channel where people have encounters in their dreams where the being stalking them seems to be able to affect their dreams. It's just one possible explanation I thought of when reading this story. Whatever the case may be, imagine looking out the window of the vehicle you're in to see a humanoid figure not just running fast enough to approach your vehicle, but to keep pace with it while going at a high speed. This isn't the first I've heard of this happening in a cryptid story, and I'm sure it won't be the last. What a horrifying sight that would be, and then to have it smile at you like it did the young man in this story? I can't say I blame him for getting sick, or not wanting to go back to that reservation. What do you think about this one? What would you do if you looked out your window to see something like that running alongside your car? The next story comes to us from a poster who shared a friend's encounter in the comments of the first story. It is a similar experience that he was reminded of when he read that story. The first story was posted 10 years ago, with the story taking place in the second story 11 years before that. The original poster lives in a small town in Oklahoma that, according to him, has a sizable Native American population. The story he tells is his friends who had a strange experience in the town, but that isn't where his Skinwalker encounter took place. At the time of him sharing his story, the friend was around 35 years old, happily married with a family, and had a genuinely good-natured personality. The OP couldn't imagine him fabricating a story without any valid reason. It was during a late-night conversation when the topic of an abandoned building on campus of a small community college nearby came up. The building was used for housing before it was abandoned. Rumor had it that the place was haunted. The OP and another of his friends were intrigued and wanted to sneak in to investigate. However, their friend, who had once lived in an apartment on that very campus, strongly advised against it. He shared some eerie experiences he had encountered there, like hearing footsteps coming from an empty apartment upstairs and witnessing a fridge mysteriously opening and closing. Naturally, he assumed that someone was squatting up there, so he decided to investigate at around 1 a.m. armed with a baseball bat. As he ascended the stairs leading to the apartment, he realized that there was no way for anyone to escape without being noticed. To his surprise though, when he opened the door, all he found was an old non-functioning fridge at the far end of the room. However, when his own doors began to open and shut on their own, he did not stick around. He then recounted a story he claimed was even more unsettling while on his way back from Mexico, where he was originally from. He had been driving back to the United States with his wife asleep in the passenger seat. It was late, around midnight, and he was on a deserted road not far from the border. He decided to keep going rather than stopping somewhere for the night. As he drove, he noticed something in his peripheral vision outside the passenger window. There was something out there, and it was keeping pace with him. He tried to shake it off by accelerating, but it continued to keep pace with the car. He tried to dismiss whatever he was seeing as him being tired and his eyes playing tricks on him. It wasn't until whatever was running beside him changed direction and began to intercept his vehicle that he realized it was a humanoid figure. It was shrouded in darkness, but he could tell it was human-like in appearance. He sped up to 90 miles an hour, and whatever this thing was veered off back into the darkness and disappeared. The OP says that his eyes welled up with tears as he told the story, and when he was done, his hand was visibly shaking. He describes him as a tough guy who never BS'd anyone. It was obvious to the OP that the encounter had shaken him to his core. He vowed never to return to Mexico. Just like in the first story, we have another humanoid figure with the ability to run so fast that it was able to keep pace with a car going at high speeds. Being that the OP describes his friend as being visibly shaken by the experience, it makes me believe him. Because if someone would have made up a story like this, they would have to be an excellent actor to produce tears and be visibly upset like the friend was when he was telling it. And honestly, most of the time when someone makes something up, the story becomes a little too outlandish to believe. Besides, who would make up something like that just to lie to his friends? Doesn't make sense. I can't blame him for being that upset about what happened and not wanting to go back to Mexico after experiencing something like that. I don't think I would even want to drive at night if something like that happened to me. But for something to be so traumatic that it made him swear off going back to his home country, again, it just adds legitimacy to the story for me. Also, he had a paranormal experience before this happened to him. This also happens in a lot of stories I hear. It seems like some people are just a lightning rod for this type of activity. It often makes me wonder if they could be and why they would be a target of the supernatural. What do you think about this one? And why do you think some people have a lot of paranormal experiences? Is it just coincidence, or is there something else to it? The next story is actually a collection of short stories that were in response to a post asking if anyone has ever had a Skinwalker encounter. The first of these short stories comes from a poster who grew up on a Navajo reservation and say they had countless experiences with Skinwalkers, to the point that it has left them desensitized to the fear or excitement of such an encounter. However, one particular incident stands out in his memory. A few years ago, while he was attempting to sleep in the bed of his truck, a peculiar dog attempted to join him. After shooing the dog away, he noticed an irate young man emerge from the wheel well where the dog had gone. They stood face to face for a moment before he inexplicably skipped away. He points out here that he did not walk or saunter off, that he specifically skipped away. The remainder of his night was spent fending off the intruder's attempts to break into his truck, despite the OP's many attempts to reason with him. Though he was tempted to use force, he ultimately chose to drive away in the middle of the night. Now, he doesn't say if his truck bed had a camper over the back of it, but by how he says this person tried to keep breaking into his truck, it makes me think that it did. I could be wrong though. But if it didn't, what would have stopped this strange person from just jumping into the bed of the truck with the OP? Ordinarily, I wouldn't necessarily link the dog and the man, but given that this encounter happened on a Navajo reservation and the man emerged from where the dog went, I definitely link the two. I'm glad he ultimately chose to leave the scene and did so safely without further incident. The next story comes from a poster who recounts her boyfriend's encounter with something outside his bedroom window. His story takes place in Mesa, Arizona, where he grew up. One morning when he was young, he woke up early and couldn't fall back asleep. As he glanced out of his bedroom window, he saw a peculiar sight. A man, wolf-like figure crouched down on his driveway facing his window. According to him, it looked like a man wearing a wolfskin or a wolf's head on top of his own. Unable to shake off the unease, he returned to bed but still couldn't go back to sleep. Eventually, curiosity got the better of him, so he went back to the window only to find the creature standing right there, its eyes glowing as it looked into his room. Frightened, he quickly retreated to his bed, desperately trying to go back to sleep. She mentions here that it could have perhaps all been just a dream. In response to a comment asking why he would ignore this and just try to go back to sleep, she said he was so young, and as a child she used to think she saw monsters lurking in the shadows, but she never dared to call out for her parents. Instead, she would bury her face under her covers and hope to fall asleep. She added that everyone has their own way of dealing with fear. Being that many children are afraid of the dark and monsters either being under their bed or in their closet, this would have to be the absolute last thing a child would want to see upon waking up. I also agree that children find safety in their beds and under their covers when they get scared at night. This could be the reason he didn't flee from his room or yell for his parents. Now, she does mention that it all could have been just a dream, and it very well could have. But given that the story takes place in Arizona, and that area of the United States accounts for the majority of Skinwalker sightings and encounters, it makes me think otherwise. Skinwalkers are said to be shamans from Navajo culture who practice dark magic and are usually depicted wearing animal skins like described in this story. I'm not saying that's accurate, so if that's incorrect, please let me know. Fortunately, the poster's boyfriend didn't see this figure again or have any other experiences with it. The final short story again comes from Arizona, where a poster shares their experience with what they believe to be a skinwalker. However, he does say that he isn't exactly sure what this thing was. He grew up in Window Rock, where he has spent most of his life. This is also where he had his encounter. When he was young, he remembers waking up and peering out his bedroom window and seeing a tall figure moving through the trees about 60 yards from his house. Those woods always gave him the creeps, and he never dared set foot in them. He says rumor has it the skinwalkers mark their territory like dogs do, and the stench back there was unbearable. It could have been the natural smell of the land, or it could have been something else entirely, but he had no desire to find out. Being that there is very little description to go off of, it's hard to say exactly what he saw moving through the trees from his window. But again, given the location, you can't rule out Skinwalker. I will say that it could have been just a dream, or he could have seen a normal animal walking through the woods, but given that he always had a sense of dread about the area and the smell he describes, it makes me think otherwise. What do you think about these encounters? The final story of this episode comes from a poster who has some very bizarre happenings while driving through Arizona on a trip with his wife. All of his encounters happened in the northern part of the state along Route 191. But this isn't all. He began having strange dreams after returning home. He lives in Utah and was headed to Pinetop, Arizona for a vacation. Before he begins his story, he mentions that he is aware of Native American cultures, being that he grew up in Utah, and shares his story as more of a cautionary tale rather than one meant to be scary. The first of their strange encounters while traveling through Arizona began even before the couple had any encounters at all. As the original poster and his wife were nearing the border between Arizona and Utah, she was suddenly overcome by a terrible migraine. He says it was so severe that he had to pull over because the motion of the car was making her feel even worse. After tending to her, they had no choice but to continue their journey. After driving what he estimates to be about 1,000 miles, his wife was in such misery that she needed another break from the car's movement. Meanwhile, he was in desperate need of a restroom. This is when he decided to stop at a small, less than appealing according to him, gas station. His wife was very ill at this point, and he was feeling a bit unnerved by his eerie and desolate surroundings, so he told her to keep the car running and lock the doors while he went inside. He entered the gas station and made his way past the main counter and down a narrow hallway, following the signs to the restroom. But as he approached the door, an overwhelming sense of dread and fear washed over him. At the end of the hallway stood an aged woman he says was well into her 70s. She was wearing tattered clothing, a shawl, and some sort of animal pelt he says could have been a coyote. As he walked towards her, she stared at him, but her eyes were completely white. He hurried into the bathroom, took care of business, and wasted no time getting out of there. When he came back out, she was gone. It was like she had just vanished, leaving behind an eerie atmosphere that engulfed the entire gas station and affected the people inside. He says they were slow moving and were careful to speak only to each other. He also points out that they were like this when he had entered, but he assumed their behavior was due to him being an outsider. Just as he was about to leave, a woman came in and said a baby horse had been struck by a car and lay dying on the side of the road, urging the clerk to call for help. The OP, already on edge, wasted no time in swiftly making his exit, getting into his car and taking off. He says the injured horse was about 5 miles in the direction they had already driven, but he did not see it when he was driving in. Racing down the road at this point, he then saw a dead horse, but it was in the opposite direction of where the woman said it was supposed to be. A stray dog was also there and had turned the horse into a meal. He had slowed down by this point and was almost certain the scene was a mirage created by the desert heat playing tricks on the hot asphalt. This brings us to his second encounter, the dog. He says the dog had weird eyes. He describes them as if, quote, it was your own, and says for a brief moment it was as if these two beings were one while they made eye contact with each other. The dog kept a careful watch on him, and he describes it as if time and space had frozen around them. His wife was sound asleep, blissfully unaware as he confronted whatever this dog really was by himself. He says he has never felt more alone and isolated as he did in that moment. They eventually reached their vacation spot, but he refused to hike, walk, or even stop on native land. When they left, they did so early in the morning, flying down Route 191 without stopping. The very night he got home, he began having very strange dreams. In his dreams, masked men wearing pelts transformed into otherworldly creatures. He admits here that the dreams actually began while he was still in Arizona, but he figured they would stop once he left the state behind. However, they persisted. After the third sleepless night filled with strange dreams, he sought the help of a spiritualist to cleanse his home, using sage, totems, and the like. After this, the dreams finally stopped, and he was able to once again sleep through the night. However, just a few nights prior to him posting his story, a strange dog showed up across the street from his home. It had the same piercing yellow eyes as the one he encountered on the road in Arizona. He ends his post saying he will update if anything else happens and with a word of caution. He says the area he drove through in Arizona was just as beautiful as it was terrifying, but don't let that suck you in and let you get lured into something worse. He urges anyone driving on Route 191 to keep driving and not to stop. I will start by saying it doesn't look like anything else came of the stray dog that showed up at the original poster's home because there were no further posts about it. But that's a good thing. One commenter who used to live on a reservation in Arizona brought up some interesting things regarding this story worth mentioning. The first was that the old woman in the gas station with the white eyes could have been blind. The OP replied by saying he believed this was true as well, but it still felt different to him. And I'm sure it did. That would have been an unexpected and unsettling thing to see, much less to have the woman seemingly staring at him even if she was blind. And then for her to seemingly vanish when he came out of the bathroom? That's just bizarre, not to mention the unsettling feeling that had come over the gas station and the people inside of it. Another thing the commenter mentions is that having strange dreams is a common occurrence on the reservation after encountering things like what the OP did during his trip. He goes on to say that he experienced them shortly after moving to the reservation, and they were bizarre. Some Navajo people he spoke to mentioned that Skinwalkers can influence dreams and reach people through them. He believes that there is truth to that, as do I. I have heard way too many stories where cryptids seem to be able to manipulate our dreams and torment people using them. This is especially true when it comes to creatures based in Native American lore, such as Skinwalkers, Wendigo, and Wichuge, just to name a few. I'm just glad the OP was able to get it taken care of and hasn't had any further encounters. What do you think about this story? Does it make you want to take a road trip through Arizona? And that's going to do it for this episode. I hope you enjoyed these stories. If you'd like to hear more stories like these and other types of cryptids, make sure to subscribe to the channel. If you want to send me your story, I'd love to read it. My email is wolfwhocriedcryptid@gmail.com. I will also put it in the description below. With your permission, I may want to use it in an episode. Even if you'd prefer that I didn't share your story on my channel and just want someone to listen, email me. We can privately talk about your encounter. And please remember to keep it civil in the comments section. No one deserves to be ridiculed whether they believe or not. Thank you for listening. I'll catch you at the next episode.